My name is Harleen Gambhir. I'm a counterterrorism analyst at the Institute for the Study of War. ISW is an open source intelligence organization that focuses on conflict zones in the Middle East and beyond. My work particularly focuses on the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, ISIS, and we have developed a specialty in studying what ISIS is doing outside of Iraq and Syria. So in what we call ISIS's near abroad, which is the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia, and then the far abroad, which is the wider world. And so over the past year or so, my team has been looking very extensively at how ISIS is executing its global strategy.
Now, Harleen, in both war games, the U.S. was reluctant to act for fear of narrowing strategic options in the future. What are the potential consequences of this reluctance?
Well, I think we'll just see that the United States has less operating space with which to actually counter ISIS. A key observation that we had from our assessment of ISIS's global strategy was that ISIS is doing different things in each of its geographic areas. It has a different campaign for Iraq and Syria than it does for the Middle East, than it does for the wider world. The United States and its allies, in forming a strategy against ISIS, don't necessarily need to counter ISIS in the same way in each place, but they do need to actually be thinking about countering ISIS and forming a strategy for doing so outside of Iraq and Syria. And so what we saw from the United States was a decision to wall off any concept of action outside of Iraq and Syria that in the end greatly narrowed the United States' ability to affect its partners' actions and to counter not only ISIS's extremism, but many other actors' extremism at large.
Well, why do you think other participants were also unwilling to take actions to limit ISIS's regional expansion?
It's difficult to justify action against ISIS if you don't actually feel like it's part of a coherent strategy, I think is the difficulty. Most of the partner states that the United States was looking to for assistance during the simulation chose to focus on their own domestic security, which as a rational actor, it makes sense for those players to choose to do that. However, I think if the United States players in the game and in the United States in reality had actually formed a coherent global strategy to counter ISIS, that would actually be a source of leverage to convince partners to take broader action.
What's the danger of framing ISIS's expansion in a piecemeal, divided manner as opposed to responding to it as a global phenomenon?
It sets us up for strategic surprise, primarily. If we're not really watching what ISIS is doing, if we're not paying attention to what it's saying about what it will do and the capabilities that it has to do those things, then we're setting ourselves up for a situation in which we are continuously surprised by its affiliates and their actions.
Harleen, what outcomes predicted by the war game have already unfolded?
Since we ran the Wargame in February and March of this year, we've seen many of ISIS's actions that we assessed would occur actually happen in real life. For example, ISIS's affiliates in Egypt and Libya have expanded their military capability as we assessed that they would. ISIS declared a governorate in Russia's North Caucasus region as we assessed that it would and actually built into the game. And at the same time, ISIS has used its increasing capability within North Africa to not only attack Western tourists on the Mediterranean, but also to encourage synchronized attacks to occur on multiple continents during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. Aside from ISIS's actions, we've also seen that various actors that made choices during the war game also reflected actual events in real life. For example, the United States did choose to support Egypt as a regional force against terrorism. I think the war game was beneficial for two reasons. One, it did help us to see what the results of ISIS's global strategy may be over the course of this year and next. Two, it actually made very clear the value of threat forecasting of the type that the Institute for the Study of War does. We assessed ISIS's intent and capabilities, and we also looked at the intent and capabilities of other involved actors, and that helped us to see months in advance very important developments to U.S. national security. And so I think one of the major takeaways for me was that we need to continue to do these sorts of exercises to understand the complex environments that the United States is operating in and to effectively counter our adversaries. So we're always watching ISIS's activities in the near abroad and the far abroad. In particular, over the next several months, I'll be focusing on ISIS's information warfare, looking specifically at what it's been able to do over social media and how that might change the nature of the global jihadist threat for the United States in the future. We're also looking at ISIS's expansion of its way of warfare from Iraq and Syria to its regional affiliates, and to understand the way in which ISIS is changing the nature of jihadism in the Middle East and North Africa.